Good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons, getting right down to business with the news-driven hour after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. It's Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com, and your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks ending higher today to kick off the new week. Investors now await the Fed's policy meeting and new inflation reports due later this week. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 69 points, the S&P 500 of 14, and the NASDAQ up 59. Yep, looks like we've gotten some record highs today. Following today's session, the S&P 500 has closed at its 26th record close of the year, and the NASDAQ, with its higher finish today, moving up to its 14th record high close of the year. We did watch the bond yields and higher for a second straight session. We see the yield on the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, now at 4.47%. NVIDIA stock closing at $121 and change today. Yep, you heard me, $121 and change. How did that happen? Well, the NVIDIA stock split started trading today after a 10-for-1 stock split. The stock was above $1,200 before the split. Apple stock finishing higher today. Actually was higher, but then finished down nearly 2%, with losses picking up during the keynote address. They had their big Worldwide Developers Conference today. The action meant that Apple shares had their worst performance on the day of one of those keynote developer conference keynotes going back to at least 11 years, according to the historians who follow Apple closely. Apple stock is now barely positive on the year, by the way, just 0.3% over the course of the year so far. Tesla also in focus. Elon Musk said in his words, "It's not cool," unquote, that a major institutional shareholder has said it will oppose a shareholder resolution to give him a $56 billion bonus at next week's annual meeting. But he claimed retail investors in Tesla support it. Musk making the comments on X, formerly known as Twitter, over the weekend, which of course he also owns after a Norges Bank Investment Management, the $1.7 trillion Norway sovereign wealth manager, says it opposes the pay package at Tesla that comes up for a vote at Tesla's annual meeting coming up at the end of the week here on June 13th. Well, the cryptos moving mostly lower today. Doge seeing a hit today, down to 14 cents. We see Bitcoin is back below 70 here at 69,433. Ethereum at around 3,600. Price of oil moving higher today. Prices posting their biggest one-day climb since February and seeing the highest settlement for oil in about a week. Looks like in New York we see oil trading up $2.21 to $77.74 a barrel. And in London, Brent crude, the global benchmark, also higher by more than $2 at $81.63 a barrel. We'll take a look at the precious metals here coming up later this hour as well. We'll also talk business this hour with one of the biggest names on the L.A. business scene, and that is Tracy Hernandez, President and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Federation, L.A. BizFed. She'll be joining me live later this hour. Crime and homelessness, still big issues in the Venice Beach area of Los Angeles. I'll be joined later this hour on that by Soledad Ursua, a neighborhood council board member in Venice. But first, on your money, the markets, and the economy. Joining us live now, the one and only Jonathan Hoenig, Fox News contributor, portfolio manager at Capitalist Pig Hedge Fund, and author of the book Price is Primary, How to Profit with Any Asset in Any Market at Any Time. Jonathan Hoenig, thank you very much for coming to the line to kick off this new week. And we're at record highs for both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. NVIDIA back in the spotlight with that 10-for-1 stock split today. Apple and the whole works. Give us your assessment of things here at the moment. Hello, Jonathan.
Frank, great to be with you once and be with you, as you said, on an up day, and lots to celebrate when it comes to the market. The market's advance, though, has been really relatively narrow. It's been exactly those large cap stocks, which you talked about, Frank. You know, one note from Bespoke Investment earlier today. In the second quarter, those big ultra cap $1 trillion stocks are up on average about 11%. The rest of the S&P 500, the 490 non-trillion dollar stocks, were actually down in the second quarter. So, the market's up, but once again, it's really been a very narrow advance. In fact, the concentration of the market, Frank, of those ultra large companies is the highest going back to 1980. So I think there's places to make money moving forward in the second half of 2024, but I don't think it's going to be in these mega cap stocks that have led the market so far.
On there live with Jonathan Hoenig, and it's so terrific to have you with us here to kick off the week this time around here, Jonathan. And of course, NVIDIA back in the spotlight, coming off the 10-for-1 stock split here, now trading at about 121, lower price. What's your reaction to the latest action here with NVIDIA?
Well, you have to think of a stock split, Frank, literally like the difference between having a $10 bill or 10 single dollars. There is no economic difference. And in fact, the data is kind of split when it comes to what happens to stocks after those stock splits. On average, they tend to go up about 25%. That beats the market on average, but you've got nearly 40% of stocks, Frank, that undergo that stock split that actually lose money. So what worries me about NVIDIA isn't whether it's split or not, but Frank, quite simply, how far and how fast it's come. Here's a stock that's trading now at 70 times earnings. Not cheap by any means. It's up 700-some% in just the last year and a half. So AI might be the future, but Frank, as they always say, you sell when the bus driver or the maid is talking about purchasing the stock. Nothing to denigrate either of those professions, but it's an old Wall Street adage, and more I'm hearing from everyday people who are telling me that AI is a sure bet and NVIDIA is the stock to own. That's usually the indicator that the real money has already been made.
And to update that phrase, the Uber driver, I guess, would be another way to put it these days. We have a lot of conversations as we take rides around town. On there live with Jonathan Hoenig. Apple, of course, also in the spotlight with their big conference today and taking a hit today, which is rare to see when they have these kind of events. Apple down nearly $4 today at $193 and change. What about Apple here?
A great company, but, Frank, even before, the only reason it really had gotten a bid, it's been down for most of the year, was anticipation about, how they would integrate this AI technology, into their OS. So, Apple's a wonderful company, but I look at Apple, Frank, and again, not to be dark, but I think about a company like Cisco Systems. Cisco was basically the equivalent of Apple back in the late 1990s. It was a stock that everyone had to own and own for the long term. And Cisco now still hasn't traded back where it did some 24 years ago. So many of these can't miss major big caps. I feel like, Frank, we might be surprised even 2 or 3 years down the line. For example, I'm looking at those small cap stocks we talked about, VBR. That's an ETF that owns small cap value stocks. They've been out of favor for years now, but I own it over at capitalistpig.com. And, Frank, the reality is most people think they're diversified with an index fund, but, you've got 20% of your money in 3 stocks, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Apple. So wonderful companies, but I think now is the time, if I was really a long-term investor, I'd be looking off the beaten path and not in these great companies, but simply over-owned stocks.
All right, and of course, we have these news-driven conversations here. Tesla, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it, where Elon Musk, in this case, who heads up Tesla, is kind of, nervous about whether he'll get a $56 billion bonus this week. I don't think we've ever seen numbers like this, and apparently there's somebody that opposes giving him the $56 billion bonus. They'll decide this at their big shareholders meeting this week. In the meantime, Tesla stock has taken a hit today. Very interesting drama playing out there at Tesla.
Yeah, Frank, in the old days, I think we would think that a CEO whose stock is down 30% in a year would wanting a $50 billion pay increase. You might call that chutzpah. I don't know. There might be a lot of words, but he's not getting that. And shareholders understandably concerned, but I think that's the reality, Frank. We used to call it the Magnificent Seven. Many of those 7 aren't so magnificent anymore. And Tesla's an amazing company, but the stock, the premium that investors are paying, for example, for EV manufacturers just simply isn't where it was. And in fact, earlier this year, we saw Hertz now having basically a fire sale of their Tesla models. Many of them is now selling for $25,000 or less. So, the premium being paid for companies like Tesla is just moving. And that's why I think, Frank, ironically, some of the best buys now might be some of the least sexy stocks. Honeywell hit a new 52-week high today. General Motors hit a 52-week high. Philip Morris, the tobacco manufacturer, has been at 52-week highs. So those very unsexy names might be the next big bull markets brewing right underneath our noses.
All right, on the air live with Jonathan Honig. And let me ask you about GameStop and these other meme stocks which came to life recently, particularly GameStop, which saw about a 40% decline on Friday, and today down again big, down about 12%, extending its sell-off. This is the one that's been getting attention on social media with this guy, Roaring Kitty, who's also come under scrutiny. What about these meme names, in particular GameStop here?
Well, Frank, there's a lot of reasons to make an investment, and there's no such thing as a sure thing. But of all the reasons to make an investment, I think a tout from someone by the name of Roaring Kitty is probably the worst idea. Frank, it's been amazing watching this stock implode in the last 2 and 3 days. This blogger, this online personality has lost some $350 million. And the fact that still goes on, Frank, I think is, look, I think you want to go where the action isn't. And oftentimes, Frank, these short-term touts, I just think they're a losing bet. And in fact, they're a losing bet for their number one tout, Roaring Kitty. So I'd avoid these names like GameStop. One I do like, Frank, if you really want to be a contrarian, I still think precious metals, you mentioned you're going to be looking at some of the metals. I think platinum, totally off the radar screen, PPLT, is an ETF that just tracks the spot price of platinum, less expensive. I think that's a real smart idea. It's not being touted. It's not being, drummed up, but, it's technicals are improving. Stock is just 11% off its 52-week high. That's a bullish indicator in my book. So that's what I like a lot more than whatever Roaring Kitty happens to be touting.
Right. We used to have more sophisticated names in the past. Remember the newsletter writer Joe Granville, who had that newsletter years ago, I think it was back in 1980, who got a lot of attention and a lot of followers. So we've seen this kind of play out in the past where somebody develops a huge following and potentially moves stocks or even the entire market, right?
Yeah, Frank, at the end of the day, you really want to entrust any one guru. You have to make your own investment decisions. Right. And especially when it comes to a stock that's so dramatically overvalued. A stock like GameStop, these meme stocks, Frank, they trade on no valuation at all. It's just a greater fool theory. So, I've been doing this 20 plus years, and you've been doing it probably even a few years longer. I say that with great respect, Frank. And we've seen this end very much the same way. So, most people now at a time, Frank, where people's credit card debt is at an all-time high, people's expenses are up some $1,100 per month per family in just the last 3 years. I just really wonder, chasing a meme stock, I just think it's probably not a wise bet for most people at this point.
All right, we're getting another reading on inflation this week, which still is running hotter than where the Fed wants it. And we saw gold hit a record high this year. Silver also has been making a big move on the upside, above $30, $31 an ounce today, just below 30 an ounce. What about gold, silver, and inflation at this point?
Well, the big moves really do take time. Interestingly, Frank, the moves for a lot of precious metals and only really erupted in the second half of the 1970s. And they took their time, but I do think for that long-term investor, I do think that precious metals make sense. Don't make it an all or none. That's where people always go wrong, whether it's, a GameStop or anything else. But I do think GLD, SLV, and my favorite happens to be those white metals, Frank, platinum and palladium, PPLT and PALL. These are pretty contrarian ideas. They tend to be non-correlated with the S&P 500, but I do think for one part of a portfolio, absolutely. And the fact that those assets were at 52-week highs, Frank, is, as we said, that actually tends to be a bullish indicator. You do quite well over time buying assets that are at 52-week highs. It's a better indicator at a high than at a low. So I do like a gold, silver, platinum, and palladium for one part of a portfolio, a truly diversified portfolio these days. Absolutely.
All right, zooming out to something you touched on earlier, we had a lot of new lows today, and and 71 new highs, I think, when I glanced at it. What does that tell us about the market at this point? And zooming out to the bigger picture, what do you see ahead for this market?
Well, I think, that old adage, when in doubt, stay out. And, as a professional investor, Frank, I'm looking probably shorter term than most people. But exactly as you said, the fact that you're seeing more stocks hitting new 52-week lows, not too many hitting 52-week highs, only 71 hitting 52-week highs, says at least for right now there might not be a reason to take too much risk. And as you said, there's going to be a lot of major announcements later in the week on inflation in particular. But the markets advance has been relatively narrow. Not a lot of major new names making new 52-week highs. So, I'm looking at those, as I said, small cap I think makes sense. If you really are that long-term investor, I think you'll be wanting to look for everything that's not popular now. International, AFK, that's AFK like Africa. That's the ETF that tracks Africa, Frank. It sounds out there, but, emerging markets have been quietly outperforming in many cases. So I like AFK for long-term investors, but now is a good time, I think, to have some money on the table. The tea leaves, I think, are a little hard to see, I think, given all this uncertainty about inflation. So not a terrible time to have some cash on the table. You asked me, Frank, last time I was on, is it time to T-bill and chill? And look, You're still getting paid more for buying a 3-month government security than buying a 10-year government security. So the market is favoring short-term cash right now. So not a terrible time to do exactly what you mentioned. T-bill and chill, at least for a portion of a portfolio, absolutely makes sense to me.
Very interesting, and what we're seeing in the bond market still the signaling a recession, right? We saw the signal for more than a year now, so waiting for Godot, I guess.
Well, that inverted yield curve. I mean, it doesn't make sense, Frank. There's no reason that a bond yielding a month or 6 months should be paying more than a bond yielding 10 years or more. But that's been the case. What interestingly, many scholars have discovered that it isn't the inversion that actually signals the impending recession, Frank. It's the reversion. So maybe the fact we start to see that yield curve becoming a little less inverted might be the telltale sign that the recession is finally here. But another reason why, Frank, I think even the much heralded jobs number from Friday, a lot of victory laps in Washington about, unemployment coming in better than expected. But look, the ADP number was weak. A lot of the other indicators when it comes to jobs have been questionable. So one sparrow does not make a spring. And I think now is a great time to be defensive and not make it an all or none. The market come December might look much different than it does even in July or August.
Right. Certainly a lot of wild cards on the geopolitical front and the political front here in the U.S., which, of course, you also track very, very closely. I think you mentioned small cap stocks recently. Any thoughts on that space?
Yeah, I think that's exactly, if you really are that long-term investor, I think small caps really do make sense. I don't have any connection, but VB, that's the Vanguard Small Cap Fund, VB, these small caps, Frank, are as cheap relative to large caps as they've been any time in 35 years. So you know you're not buying the top. You're buying an asset that, if you really do have that 3-5 year time horizon, I think small caps are a great place to be allocating assets. Don't make it an all or none, but at a time, we're seeing a lot of these small and value outperform. As I said, at General Motors, Honeywell, Philip Morris, Alcoa, they've been breaking out at a time that a lot of the big ultra large cap growth has been breaking down. So go where the herd is not, and they're not in small, they're not in value, and I think that's where you're going to make money a year or 2 years out.
Fantastic, Jonathan. Well, thank you very much for fielding all these questions and going through the whole work. So hopefully you get the chill with a T-bill or however you do it. We always appreciate you joining us here, and it's always great to speak with you. We'll be looking for you on social media, too. Jonathan Honig, Fox News contributor, portfolio manager at Capitalist Pig Hedge Fund. The book is Price is Primary, How to Profit with Any Asset in Any Market at Any Time, written by the one and only Jonathan Honig. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us live here this afternoon.
Pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right after the freeways now. Good afternoon, 790 KBC. Folks, let's be honest. Sometimes we find ourselves or a loved one dealing with a massive injury caused by a terrible accident by no fault of our own. Sometimes it's simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're good at preparing for earthquakes and fires, but let's not forget to prepare in case we're involved in a major accident. It's critical to know who to call first, and things happen so fast. Clark Fielding became a lawyer to help you in a crisis. Fielding Law is focused on justice and resources for you because they understand how the system works and what to do in the most horrific situations. I always say to put the Fielding Law team in your phone under the word accident, so all you have to do is hit that button. Believe me, you'll feel a lot better having set this up for yourself and your family. The number is 833-88-SHARK. 833-88-SHARK. With the population exploding and increased vehicles on the freeways, be proactive, prepare for the worst, and expect the best. But if and when you do need help, call Clark Fielding and his team of sharks. The number again, 833-88-SHARK. 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Again, that's clarkthesharklaw.com. 790 KBC welcomes. Yep, you guessed it, ZZ Top coming to the Bank of America Performing Arts Center October 29th. Tickets are on sale Friday at Ticketmaster.com. And right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222 and get a pair of tickets to the show furnished by Nederlander Concerts. Call right now, caller 9 wins, 1-888-795-2222 for ZZ Top at the Bank of America Performing Arts Center October 29th. Stock market moving higher today with both the S&P 500 and NASDAQ achieving record highs at the close. The S&P 500 at 14 at 5,361. The NASDAQ at 59, good enough for a new high at 17,192. The Dow edging higher by nearly 70 points at 38,868. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.47%. Gold up about 11 at 2,309 and change. Silver down 3 cents at 29.84. We see the shares of NVIDIA after trading after that 10-for-1 stock split at around $121 a share now. Apple pulling back today on its big day where they had that developers conference. Apple stock taking a hit, unusually so, on a day where we had that worldwide developers conference. Down nearly 2% on the day. Taking a look at the cryptos now, Bitcoin down about 80 at 69,433. Ethereum down about $1 at 3,669. And Doge has slipped now to 14 cents. Now the latest news here on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Beautiful day here in Southern California. Let's get right down to business here now with one of the biggest names on the Los Angeles business scene, Tracy Hernandez, President and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Federation, LA BizFed, founding president of BizFed. BizFed unites 240 diverse business organizations here in the Los Angeles area, representing 420,000 employers with 5 million employees across all of Southern California. Doesn't get any bigger than that. Tracy Hernandez, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Happy Monday, Frank. Good to be talking with you.
Fantastic to have you live with us here on the air. It's been a while since we've chatted behind live microphones, and based on your social media postings on LinkedIn, the professional site, as well as Insta and all the others, you've been pretty busy. Give us an update on what's happening there.
Well, Frank, it's that time of year where we've got to get up to Sacramento because our state legislature and the governor are busy making important decisions. As you probably know, this week they're going to pass the budget deal. And so we took about 100 folks from the greater LA area and our BizFed Central Valley and spent a couple of days last week in the Capitol talking to legislators about really important, timely topics.
On there live with Tracy Hernandez, president of BizFed here in Los Angeles. And did you do some arm twisting there, getting Sacramento and California overall to be more business friendly? Has been an uphill fight over the years. Where do things stand at this point?
Well, Frank, you nailed it. There is a little bit of arm twisting, a lot of education, too, and discussion. So right now we're working on several important areas. I'll headline a few for you. One is the ever pressing and important housing that we still are 3 million housing units short here in California and like 1.2 million just right here in the greater LA area that we need to get built. So working with key legislators to streamline housing so we can get to yes faster. Another completely different topic, but working on a set of bills to address retail theft, and especially in the organized crime rings, to make it safer for our employees, our customers, and just you going into our stores, making some progress there. The other topic, ever present, is the affordable, reliable energy sources. And in our state, we're working real hard to open up all sources of energy so that we can keep everything running here in California, but hydrogen in particular needs some attention. So we had a lot of good conversations on that. A couple other things, if I have a minute, you want me to continue, or do you want to jump in?
Please do, yes. Lay it on thick. We have the time. Go right ahead.
All right, Frank. The other thing, this thing that's an acronym called PAGA. You've probably heard about it. It's called the Private Attorney General's Act. It's just an everyday, real terrible item that's meant to help workers, and it absolutely does not do that. So especially small businesses, but really every size of business, the state kind of advocated representing employees if they have a problem with an employer, and put it in the private attorneys. And so nothing's working on that. The private attorneys bring lawsuits, and instead of giving it to workers if the employer's been found wrong, it basically goes to the attorney. So we're working to overturn that, and there's some momentum there. And then you might imagine all things AI, artificial intelligence, is capturing the minds and attention of everyone on what does it mean, what is there to regulate, what is safety and private consumers' rights, along with the areas of innovation that businesses are bringing to help us in our everyday world. So those were some other key topics.
That's terrific, and pressing the lawmakers there on all of the key issues facing business people here in Southern California, as well as the Central Valley, right? I think your organization also covers the Central Valley as well as the Los Angeles area. And tell us that you mentioned the issues of homelessness and crime, certainly at or near the top of the list of business concerns these days, along with taxes and regulation. I know you've kept us well informed on the heartbeat and what's on the minds of business people here. Are those indeed the top issues these days?
Absolutely, Frank. You nailed it. A couple of things on just affordability at every level here in California is a top item. So when you mention taxes, here's just another one that's moving right now. One of our legislators has an idea that he wants to start charging a new 7% sales tax on all digital ad sales that are on all platforms. That we'd be the first in the nation to add that level of expense. But also here locally, well, in the SoCal region, the South Coast Air Quality Management District just passed another rule that says no longer can we have natural gas-fired boilers to heat our homes, our apartments, our businesses, our pools, that sort of thing. So we're trying to, these are the shock waves that seriously drive up our ability to live here, to afford our rents, buy homes, start businesses, and keep them. So those are areas where everyone, whether you're in the Central Valley, you're in LA, you're in Inland Empire, Orange County, really come to mind for folks.
Certainly, and inflation also at or near the top of the list these days. And for years we've been hearing, California needs to build more refineries. It's hard to believe that 100 years ago, California accounted for 25% of the world's oil production, which is quite remarkable. We're certainly sitting on a lot of oil, and I know you have some members in the oil industry there within BizFed. What about trying to make fuel more affordable? You mentioned some of the alternative fuels that are on the table now, but what about just good old gas and oil here?
Yeah, in fact, our folks in the Central Valley have a campaign. They actually have bumper stickers they put on their car, and it's "My job depends on oil." I mean, it's very real. They're great jobs, excellent paying jobs. They're generational jobs. You can get them at any level of education. And they do matter because consumers are buying products. I mean, we're still importing the demand that just Californians want. It's their choice. They're buying it. And we're still importing like 68% of all oil that's needed. So that does not help the environment because those are being put on ships, then all around the world and imported here. We don't have any lines of oil that pipelined in. It all has to get on a ship and go halfway around the world. So greenhouse gas emissions there are worse than just, getting it out of our own ground. And also, on that point, we did learn quite a bit recently. The governor and the legislature, a lot of, just regular Californians were wondering with the oil prices that we're paying at the pump, was anyone being gouged? And they just finished all of that reporting, did a deep dive on all of the oil refiners and producers here, and they found that indeed no gouging was happening. In fact, it's only down to 7 cents is what they could identify as marginal cost, and people don't really understand that. So, like I mentioned, it's a lot of intelligence sharing, a lot of education, a lot of getting out of the rhetoric that pops up on social media. It goes a little unchecked. Well, we're checking it, we're showing up, and we're shedding light so we can get more common sense working here for all Californians.
That's terrific. Well, thank you very much for sharing that important news with us here, and look forward to many more updates. Tracy Hernandez, founding president and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Federation, LA Business Federation, strengthening the voice of business, as you always do here. Tracy, thank you very much for taking the call here, and look forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Thanks, Frank. Have a great day.
Thank you very, very much. And right after the freeways now, 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Crime and homelessness, as we just heard, still big issues for businesses as well as residents. And the Venice Beach area has been the focus of attention lately. Let's get an update now from Soledad Ursua, Venice Neighborhood Council board member, who keeps us well informed of what's happening at that worldwide tourist destination, Venice Beach. Ursula, thank you very much. Soledad Ursua, I should say, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. Give us an update on what's happening there in the Venice Beach area.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. And unfortunately, Venice community, we have been ground zero to a series of shockingly violent and heinous crimes. In early April at 11 o'clock at night, a transient male raped, sodomized, and brutally attacked two 50-year-old women in the Venice Canals area within a 2-hour period. One woman survived the attack, although she needed her jaw wired shut for a month, missing several teeth that were knocked out. But the other victim, Sarah Alden, was declared brain dead after being in a coma for nearly 2 months. And what's so tragic here is that Sarah had just moved across the country from Massachusetts to live in Venice Beach. It had been her lifelong dream that she worked very hard to achieve. She had just signed a lease for an apartment in the Venice Canals and was walking when the attack happened. So this is something that, I live here in Venice Beach. I live in North Venice Beach. I live next door to the 154-person homeless shelter. So I know not to walk alone at night or even during the day. But sadly, this woman who was out of state, a tourist, she did not know how violent this area is. And unfortunately, we see that tourists coming from out of state or even from different parts of the state, and they find themselves victims.
That is absolutely heartbreaking to hear that horrifying update, but that is what's happening out there. And this is, again, a place where tourists from around the world want to go to there. And I was just with some folks from Australia this past weekend, and I have to say they were absolutely appalled by the presence of homeless people there, and just the whole situation there was absolutely appalling to our international visitors, unfortunately.
And, it's crazy because it's not even at night. So we know that women should not be walking at night, but it can happen during the day. Last month, a Venice woman was jogging on the boardwalk on a Monday morning at 7 a.m. when a transient male jumped out, grabbed her by the ponytail, and attempted to drag her into the bathrooms to rape her. Luckily here, a bystander intervened, and the transient male was arrested in Santa Monica. And, shocker, this transient male had a long criminal track record. He was actually out for parole. He was out on parole for an assault with a deadly weapon when the attack occurred. So this is the boardwalk. It's a beautiful run. I run on the same path about 3 times a week. It's one of the reasons that I moved to Venice. And, authorities tell us that we shouldn't wear headphones while running, since we may not be able to hear a perpetrator running up behind us. Do you know how hard it is to run a few miles without music? It's kind of like blaming the victim here. Soon maybe they'll just tell us not to exercise outdoors. And, California is supposedly a progressive state that champions women's rights. So it's absolutely absurd that women are not safe walking day or night.
What is the police situation there, or the sheriffs, as the case may be? Is there a visible presence there?
Well, after the attacks, what's interesting is, we have a female mayor, Karen Bass. She has been largely silent on the attack. Our council member, Tracy Park, has been very vocal, saying that she's tired of the social experiment. But the sad fact here is that nothing is being done to prevent these attacks from happening again. As long as transient males are allowed to live on our city streets, these attacks will continue to happen. But what's even stranger about this case, the assailant, Anthony Francisco Jones, he will appear in court tomorrow. But what's strange here is that we don't know his legal status. It's considered unknown. Also, we've had some local reporters who have been very diligent following up on this case. What's strange here is that he does not have a criminal track record. He doesn't really exist in our system. So there is a good chance that he may be out of the country. He may be a migrant. And so this is one of these things where the local Venice community is asking for questions. We're not getting any response. So hopefully we will know more tomorrow. But again, it does not matter, because as long as men are allowed to live on our streets, these attacks will continue to happen.
What is the encampment situation in that area? And I remember speaking with you some time ago about the RVs that are parked there with homeless people living in them, even renting them, or just breaking into them and so forth. Give us an update on what's happening there.
We've seen a major reduction in encampments, meaning tents. But the problem now is that we don't have any parking enforcement in Los Angeles City. So what we're seeing is sort of the proliferation of vehicular dwelling or vehicle encampments. Just a few blocks from me, or just a block from me, there are RVs that have sat dormant on our street since March of 2020. And that's because during COVID, the LA City Council decided to suspend vehicular code enforcement so that homeless people could shelter in place during COVID. We all knew that there was no sheltering in place going on. But what's happened is that there's actually no municipal code on the books to even go back to enforcement. So what we see is that the tents are down, the tent encampments are down, but it's almost this new problem has now emerged where anybody can show up in a car, park, and live in the car. And so that is a big thing, because how are women supposed to feel safe walking by a string of 10 RVs with men living inside the RVs? We know that these RVs are basically used to, store drugs for some of the gang members. There could be weapons in there. So it's just a very dangerous situation. And there's really nobody, no elected official who's willing to tackle this. It's one of these things where, in the name of social justice, there's nothing that anybody wants to do.
Yeah, quite a contrast from some of the other South Bay cities. So it certainly goes back to leadership, as you properly point out. When you go to Manhattan Beach, Hermosa, and so forth, you take that drive all the way down the coast. You don't see what you see there in Venice. A beautiful beachfront neighborhood, the envy of the world. And in that horrific situation that you just described, it's heartbreaking, but we're going to keep an open line to you and keep the folks informed, and want to wish you all the best. Soledad Ursua, the Venice Neighborhood Council board member, an outspoken member of that council. Thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon. Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
When you have sports mixed with your pop culture, along with humor and celebrity interviews, your earbuds are enjoying The Rich Eisen Show.
Women's basketball legend, Sue Bird. Caitlin Clark, obviously, front and center for the WNBA season. What have you seen over the first couple of games for her?
Part of professional sports is you're going to have some stretches. You're going to shoot bad. Your team's going to lose. And how do you respond to that? Everybody's clearly got their defensive game plan built around her, which is a compliment, but you got to figure it out from there.
Search for The Rich Eisen Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.